July 3, 2020, Denver, Colorado. At 9:27 p.m., a 911 call hits the city's dispatch. A neighbor on the 1500 block of Oneida Street says a man just knocked on her door, frantic, claiming the woman upstairs is dead. Patrol cars and paramedics roll in, lights washing the brick and stucco of a quiet Montclair block. Officers climb to the second-floor unit. The door is unlocked. Inside, the apartment is still, but wrong. There's the kind of silence that follows panic. They find her in the bedroom. 40-year-old Ariana Wolk lies in a pool of blood on and beside the bed. The violence is focused, personal. The wounds are sharp force injuries to her neck. Medics step in, then step back. There's nothing they can do. She's pronounced dead at the scene. Homicide is called. While officers lock down the unit, a city, the whole country really, will later learn who Ariana was. A devoted mother, an artist, a friend with an easy smile, and something else, a family line that had already seen unspeakable horror. Ariana was the granddaughter of Rosemary LaBianca, one of the victims murdered by Charles Manson's followers in 1969. 51 years later, another woman in that lineage is gone, this time in a modest Denver apartment, with no cult, no ransom note, no manifesto, just blades and rage. But that connection isn't known yet. Right now the work is granular. Scene techs start their slow choreography, photos, swabs, measurements, the meticulous sweep of a room that's been turned into evidence. Blood spatter patterns tell part of the story. The attack happened here, and it was fast. Drawers aren't dumped. Electronics aren't missing. This doesn't look like a burglary that spun out of control. It looks like a killer who came for her. Detectives canvass the building. Who lives nearby? Who heard what? Who saw who? One neighbor repeats the strange opener. A man banging on her door, saying the upstairs woman was dead. Why would a stranger do that? Guilty conscience? Panic? Or someone trying to look like a bystander? Back inside, little things begin to matter. A cup in the kitchen sink, its surface smudged. The trail of contact from room to room. The bedclothes bunched in the struggle. It's the kind of scene where a killer imagines. He's wiped it down and misses the piece that will undo him. Word spreads among Ariana's friends who can't reach her. Calls go to her family. The shock in those calls, the timing, the date, burns a hole. July 3rd, the eve of a holiday, the middle of a pandemic summer, a weekend that won't end. By morning, the coroner has the body, and detectives have a problem that, from the outside, seems simple. Find the last person who saw her alive. Denver isn't Los Angeles. People notice comings and goings on a quiet street. If she was alone, who found her? If she wasn't, who left? The lab moves fast. There's always a race in a case like this, between the detectives assembling a timeline and the science crawling the surfaces. And then, a break. Fingerprints on that cup. They're not Ariana's. They're not a roommate's. They hit. A name comes back. He is 24 years old, local. No one in Ariana's inner circle recognizes him as a longtime fixture. That alone suggests something about the risk. A newer presence in her orbit, not a partner with years of history. Detectives start pulling phone records, social media crumbs, surveillance clips from gas stations and corner stores. Pieces of a night begin to line up. She was seen with him. They were together before the killing. And according to investigators, when they finally get him in a room, he tells them what they already suspect. He was there. The picture that emerges isn't complicated. It's intimate and sudden. There's no sign the killer tore the apartment apart looking for valuables. No sign of a staged, forced entry. No long chase through the city. Just the oldest story in homicide files. Two people behind a closed door, and one of them never walks out. For Ariana's family, the news arrives in blunt points. Officers found her late Friday, She was already gone. It was violent. The injuries were to her neck. They have a suspect. He's young. He was with her that night. He's under arrest. Only then does the past leak into the present. Reporters find the records, the old photographs, the public history, and the headlines bend: granddaughter of Manson, victim slain in Denver. That framing is jarring, and it risks turning Ariana into a symbol instead of a person. But it also underlines how generational and indifferent violence can be. You can live a half-century past a family's nightmare and still find it knocking on your door in a different shape. Detectives keep circling the timeline from two directions: the last hours of Ariana's life and the first hours after her death. What did the suspect do? Where did he go? Did he dump anything? According to authorities, he fled Denver after the killing, heading south, discarding clothing as he went. That's not planning. That's adrenaline. And it's not a mystery either. People run the way they think. Straight lines, bad choices. Back in Montclair, the scene tells its own quiet truths. The bedroom shows the struggle was close range and fierce. There's no sign of defensive gunfire or a weapon fight. This was blades and hands. The bed, the floor, the walls, everything reads contact. A woman tried to live. A man tried to stop her from doing that. What's the motive? That's the question that hums under every early press release and every tight-lipped statement. Detectives don't commit to one in public. They rarely do. Not this early. But the signals are there in what they emphasize. The two were together before the murder. The killing was personal and at close distance. The suspect acknowledges involvement. This isn't a killer who breaks in for a TV and panics. This is someone who chose, in that moment, to cut a life off. In the days that follow, the DA's office moves. Charges are filed. First-degree murder. The language in the filing is clinical. Dates, blocks, injuries. But the weight is not. First degree means intent. It means a jury will eventually be asked to believe the killer acted with deliberation. The defense, when it comes, will try to pull that down. Sudden quarrel, intoxication, anything to suggest a murder in the second degree or manslaughter. But the wounds, the scene, and the suspect's own words will fight that climb. Ariana's name spreads beyond Denver. In obituaries and fundraisers, she's not a headline. She's a daughter, a mother, a friend. People talk about her art, her warmth, how she turned rooms lighter. The city that adopted her sits with the idea that evil can be this quiet. A summer night, a modest block, a second-story apartment. No gunfire echoing down the street. No sirens until it's already too late. If you strip the noise away, the true crime podcasts, the old Manson photos, what happened in that bedroom is something every homicide detective understands. A private space became a battlefield. A woman's last seconds were spent not in confusion, but in fight. And the first people to see the aftermath were strangers in uniform who have to go home, shower the copper smell off, and tell their own families about nothing at all. What comes next is the slow machinery. Arraignments, status conferences, discovery dumps, motions, lab bench notes, pulled phone logs, excerpts from interviews. The state will say the science and the suspect's own account pin him to the killing. The defense will say context matters, that you can't weigh a life in prints and swabs. Somewhere in that space, 12 people will sit and decide what the word deliberate means. For now, what we have is the first act of a case that stole a life and sent a shock through a family that had already lived through America's most infamous murders. And yet, to honor Ariana, this story can't just be about lineage. It has to be about her. About the last day of a woman who should have woken up on July 4th to texts and fireworks, not a city morgue. About the neighbor who opened her door to a man with panic in his eyes and, without knowing it, lit the fuse that brought police upstairs. About a cup in a sink that turned out to be louder than a killer's best plan. This was not a mystery written in codes. It was written in fingerprints and steel, in a small bedroom on Oneida Street, in the stillness that follows violence. And it is just the beginning. The break in Ariana's case didn't come from a dramatic stakeout or some hidden camera in the ceiling. It came from something ordinary and stupid. A plastic cup. Detectives had it bagged the night they sealed the scene. A clear cup with a trace of pink liquid, recovered not far from the apartment. It felt out of place. Ariana wasn't known for leaving trash outside. The neighbors didn't recognize it as theirs. So, CSU dusted it. The prints lifted clean. When the lab pushed them through the system, they hit. Not on some ancient dusty card from juvenile detention. On a fresh set taken just days after the killing. The 24-year-old tied to those ridge patterns had been picked up in Colorado Springs on July 7th, 4 nights after Ariana was found. His booking prints matched the cup. Now the cup wasn't just an object, it was a handle. Detectives started pulling the suspect's movements backward. Surveillance along East Colfax showed a slim young man in a black tee with that same clear cup in his hand, walking beside a woman whose face the officers already knew from the bedroom photos. Colfax and Monaco. The busy corridor where strangers cross and disappear. People remembered them together. Cashiers remembered her smile. A camera caught him taking a sip. Another camera caught them drifting toward Oneida. Inside the interview room a day later, the suspect opened fast. He knew why he was there. He knew about the cup. He wasn't going to out-science a fingerprint. He admitted what the detectives already suspected. He'd spent time with Ariana that night. He had gone back to her apartment. He'd been inside. But the story he tried to give the room was the oldest damage control in homicide files. It got out of hand. He didn't arrive intending to kill anyone. There was alcohol. There was sex. There was an argument. Things he said he didn't fully remember. When the detectives didn't flinch, he pushed the words farther, quietly. Yes, he stabbed her. He left. He panicked. He dumped his bloody clothes. He got a ride south to Colorado Springs and laid low. That wasn't a confession dressed up as poetry. It was plain admission tied to plain evidence. Her blood in the bedroom, his prints on the cup, video of him holding it, witnesses who'd seen them together within walking distance of her door, and now his own voice filling in the gaps. The detectives still did the methodical work, because good cases aren't made of one shiny fact. They worked the apartment again. They mapped contact points. They reconstructed the path of the attack from bed to floor to bed again. The medical examiner's preliminary notes fit. Sharp force injuries to the neck, consistent with the blood spatter pattern and the pooled stain that had bled into the mattress and the carpet seam. While the forensic loop tightened, they started mapping the hours after Ariana's last movement. Cameras along Colfax showed the suspect peeling away, alone. A gas station on Quebec caught him passing through. On a bus camera, he looked smaller, like the fight had gone out of him. In the morning, he was in Colorado Springs. Somewhere between Denver and El Paso County, he'd stripped out of the clothes and thrown them away. The team drafted a search warrant for his person. Swabs, photographs, any healing cuts on his hands or forearms that might match a slash from a blade or a defensive bite. They executed it and sent the samples to the lab. The reports would take time, but the shape of the case didn't depend on them anymore. In Montclair, the canvass continued. Detectives spoke with Ariana's friends about the last calls and texts they'd gotten. Nothing urgent. Nothing that hinted she'd invited trouble. She was making plans for the weekend. A neighbor remembered hearing a thud, a short cry, then quiet. No screaming match, no long argument through the drywall. If there were words, they were short enough to vanish into the summer air. The DA's office made its move quickly, a first-degree murder count. The language in the few pages looked clinical because that's what filings do. A name, a date, a block number, sharp force injuries to the neck, and the phrase that changes everything for a jury. After deliberation? That isn't a timeline, it's a state of mind. It tells 12 strangers that the government believes the killer had time to think and kept going anyway. The defense knows how to read those words. After deliberation is where they aim their first hammer. In every meeting, they look for anything to shave intent down to. Impulse. Was there heavy drinking? Drugs? An emotional trigger? A weapon grabbed in the moment rather than brought to the scene? They read and reread the affidavit, looking for a breath to put between the decision and the act. But the room where Ariana died refuses to cooperate with any version of "it just happened." There's nothing scattered like a fight over theft. No sign of a burglary staged and botched. No unknown third party blown in off Colfax. Just a bed, a floor, and a body that tells its own story. Detectives also chased the corners because juries ask about corners. Did anyone else have a reason to hurt her? Was there an ex with a grudge? Had she reported threats? They learned what many of her friends already knew. Ariana was a magnet for people. Open, trusting, the kind who could take a walk with a stranger and see the best version of him first. That isn't a flaw. It's what makes a community. But it's also how a predator gets inside the door without breaking a lock. By mid-July, the defendant shuffled into a courtroom in shackles for advisement. Even in a county used to bad nights, this one drew attention. Partly because of the La Bianca thread. Reporters can't help themselves. But mostly because of the way the evidence fit. A cup, a camera, a face, a print, an admission. The pieces nested. The judge set the path forward. There would be status conferences, a preliminary hearing, discovery, and lab logs traded back and forth, and if nothing cracked, a trial date set. Behind those procedural checkpoints, Ariana's life kept getting rebuilt in corners of the internet. Memorial posts, fundraisers to move her body, photos that weren't morgue photos. Her son's name came up in every message. Friends talked about her art, about the way she laughed, about her kindness being the opposite of the brutality in that bedroom. Meanwhile, detectives made one more loop over the route south. They put a timeline on the discard, when the clothes were thrown away, where, what type of container, whether any of it could be recovered. In cases like this, you don't count on the trash to save you. You lock the story down without it and treat anything you find as a bonus. Still, the act of throwing things away says something to a jury. It's the physical version of "I knew what I did." The prosecution team started building their opening in their heads. A quiet Friday night in a small second-story apartment. The defendant and Ariana together by choice. No forced entry, no sign of a robbery. A brutal, close-range attack focused on the neck. A defendant seen with a cup that carries his fingerprints. Surveillance following him in the hours before the killing. A recorded statement in which he places himself at the scene and admits to stabbing her. And the flight south with discarded clothes. Not a whodunit. A why did he do it, and what name does the law give to the way he did it? In private, the questions everyone asks after a case like this go a different direction. What if she'd never said yes to a walk? What if the cup had gone to the dishwasher? What if the neighbor hadn't opened her door when a panicked young man knocked? What if the lab had been slower? What if the camera on Colfax had been broken that night? But the job for detectives, and later for the jurors, isn't to live in the what-ifs. It's to look at the ordinary objects left behind. A cup, a set of prints, a swath of fabric, the cut on a hand, and pull a straight line through them, from one evening to forever. The straight line they saw led from a cup in a hand on Colfax, to a bed on Oneida, to a ride to Colorado Springs, with a bag of clothes that would never go through a washing machine. And at the center of that line was a woman who had been alive, then wasn't. Not because she met the wrong person, but because the person she met made the worst possible choice. In Part 3, the legal gears start to grind: the preliminary hearing, the push toward a plea, and the fight over whether this was a murder after deliberation. Or the defense's favorite adjective: sudden. The first time the public sees him in a Denver courtroom, he looks smaller than the mugshot. Jail khakis, shackles clicking in rhythm. His name, Jose Sandoval Romero, echoes off wood, the way names do when they suddenly mean more than a person. This is advisement, not drama. But for Ariana's family in the gallery, simply hearing the charge read aloud is its own kind of violence. First-degree murder. The prosecutor recites the anchor points of the case in the flat cadence of a calendar setting. July 3rd, Oneida Street. Sharp force injuries to the neck. A pool of blood in the bed. Video along East Colfax, capturing Ariana with the defendant. The clear cup with pink liquid. Latent prints matched to him from a July 7th booking in Colorado Springs. A recorded interview in which he admitted stabbing her, then fleeing and ditching his clothes. Defense counsel doesn't argue facts at a first appearance. The job is narrower. Make sure their client understands his rights and signal that not guilty is the default setting, for now. But everyone knows where this is heading. If the state can prove what it says it can prove, this won't be a whodunit. It'll be a battle over intent and degrees. A few weeks later comes the preliminary hearing, the filter that decides whether the case goes forward. It's quick and clinical. A detective testifies about the scene. No forced entry, no ransacked rooms, no signs of a burglary gone wrong. The medical examiner's early findings: multiple stab wounds to the neck, defensive injuries on Ariana's arms and hands, blood patterns consistent with an attack that began on the bed and collapsed to the floor. Another detective walks the judge through the chain. Colfax video with a man holding a clear cup. That cup collected from Ariana's yard. Prints tying to the defendant's July 7th arrest. The interview where he describes being with her, stabbing her, and leaving. Probable cause isn't a high bar. The judge doesn't blink. Bound over for trial. Behind the scenes, the two sides start waging the war that jurors will never see: motions. The defense files to exclude portions of the interview: unduly prejudicial, not voluntary, taken in violation of rights. The state pushes back: he was Mirandized, he waved, he talked. The defense aims at the cup: chain of custody, contamination, whether the latent lifts are truly his and not a lab artifact. The state counters with the match from a separate recent booking. It's not a cold card from an ancient file, it's a clean hit. There's also a quiet fight over language. Prosecutors want to be able to say, after deliberation, the phrase that powers first-degree murder in Colorado: acting with intent, with reflection. The defense wants to drag that back to the swamp of sudden quarrel, intoxication, heat of passion, anything that suggests a mind that didn't have time to think. In the middle of those filings, investigators keep filling gaps. They pull more video to firm up the couple's route that night. They log the exact timestamps that show the defendant with that cup, then show the cup on the lawn. They memorialize his hands at booking. 2 partially healed lacerations on the right hand, consistent with a knife slipping during repeated stabbing motions. They track the path south, toward Colorado Springs, noting where he says he got rid of clothing. Even if the trash is long gone, the act of throwing it away speaks for itself. Ariana's friends meet with the DA's victim advocates. They are told what to expect: continuances, status dates, a trial that may be a year away. They are told what not to expect: closure that fixes anything. They bring photos that aren't crime scene photos: her son's smile, her artwork, the ordinary joy of a life that wasn't supposed to end in a second-floor bedroom. Meanwhile, the public narrative keeps dragging Ariana back into a past she never chose. Headlines mention that she is the granddaughter of Rosemary LaBianca, killed in 1969 by the Manson followers. It's a true fact. It is also a distortion. Ariana didn't die because of the past. She died because of what one man did in one room on one night. Still, the lineage turns a local murder into a national headline, and that attention adds weight to every hearing. At one of those hearings, the prosecution sketches their trial roadmap for the court. It is simple. Witnesses who saw Ariana with the defendant near Colfax and Monaco on the day of the murder. Surveillance images of him holding the cup later recovered at her home. Forensic testimony that his latent prints were on that cup. The officers who responded to Oneida Street and found her dead in bed, with sharp force injuries to the neck and defensive wounds. The detective who interviewed him, who will tell jurors he admitted to stabbing her, fleeing, and discarding his clothes. The booking photos documenting healing cuts on his hand. The timeline that puts him with her, then puts him gone. This is the skeleton. Flesh it with the lab notes, the ME's report, and the cell site pings, and you have a body of proof that breathes. The defense sketches theirs by subtraction. No forced entry? That's because he was invited. So this isn't some prowler scenario. No ransacked rooms? Then there was no robbery motive to color the scene? Intoxication? Perhaps both had been drinking. Memory is glazed. Impulse blurs intent. No recovered weapon bearing his DNA? Then every inference is just an inference. The admission? Maybe it was confused. Maybe it was coerced. Maybe it was the rambling of a young man saying whatever he thought would stop the questions. And hovering over it all is the lodestar of reasonable doubt. The defense doesn't have to convince 12 people of an alternate timeline. They just have to make one juror hesitate at the edge of after deliberation. As the calendar rolls toward trial, prosecutors sit down with Ariana's family and tell them the thing that guts almost every loved one. Most murder cases don't end with a dramatic jury verdict. Many end with a plea. Why? Because juries are living creatures. Because appeals are time machines. Because certainty in years can be a better kind of justice than all or nothing at trial. A defendant who is boxed in by his own words and the physical evidence has a choice. Risk a life sentence on first-degree murder or plead to second-degree murder and accept decades in prison. It isn't mercy, it's math. For the family, that choice is not theoretical. A plea means never having to hear a defense attorney say the word sudden about a woman's last minutes. It means never smelling the photos. It means knowing how many birthdays the defendant will miss without having to sit through the anatomy of the wounds. For the defendant, a plea is the difference between a future measured in if and a future measured in when. Decades are still decades, but decades isn't never. Publicly, nothing is decided. On paper, the case is pointed at trial. The prosecution keeps filing witness lists. The defense keeps filing motions to exclude. The judge keeps setting status dates. Jurors, somewhere out there, keep living their lives without knowing they'll be asked to sit with blood and law for weeks. And the story the public knows crystallizes into a few unforgiving truths. Ariana invited company on a summer evening and didn't survive it. The man accused of killing her told detectives he stabbed her and ran. His fingerprints, the camera's eye, and the science of the scene stitched that story together. Everything else, motive, backstory, the thousand whys that haunt every homicide, is legally irrelevant unless it opens a hole big enough for reasonable doubt to crawl through. In the quiet moments between hearings, the ripples keep spreading. The neighbor who opened her door to a frantic knock can't stop replaying the look in his eyes. The friend who found the police tape where a laughter used to live walks a different route now. Ariana's son wakes up in a world where July feels different. The detectives who carried this case from a cup in the yard to a name on an indictment move on to the next call. But when the DA asks them to testify, they will walk back into that bedroom in words and the copper will come back to their throats. What comes next is either a jury or a signature. Either way, the law is going to write a number beside Ariana's name. In the final part, we'll take you inside that decision, what the plea negotiations produced, how the court sentenced the man who admitted stabbing her, and how Ariana's family chose to speak her back into the room one last time. The last stretch of a homicide case is never cinematic. It's calendars, continuances, and cold language, until the day a courtroom fills and the people who loved the victim finally get to speak. In Ariana Jean Wolk's case, the legal endgame took shape the way many strong cases do, with a plea on the table. By the time both sides sat down to talk numbers instead of theories, the state's file had hardened into a clean spine. There was the 911 call and the bedroom on Oneida Street. The blood pooled into the mattress seam, the medical examiner's finding of sharp force injuries to Ariana's neck, and defensive wounds on her hands and arms. The Colfax corridor footage showing her walking with a young man, the clear cup with pink liquid that reappeared in her yard, latent prints on that cup tied directly to a booking set taken days later, and above everything, the defendant's own interview. Yes, he was with her. Yes, he stabbed her. Yes, he fled and threw away his bloody clothes before leaving Denver. Not a whodunit. What do we call what he did? Under Colorado law, the state could roll the dice on first-degree murder after deliberation and aim at a life sentence. But any prosecutor who spent time in front of 12 strangers knows how fragile deliberation can be. When a defense attorney repeats words like sudden, drinking, and heat of passion, one juror's doubt can turn certainty into retry. So the DA's office did what experienced offices do. They leveraged strength into certainty. Second-degree murder. A plea with no trial, no cross-examination of Ariana's last minutes, no need for her family to sit while a defense lawyer parses her wounds into arguments. In exchange, a decades-long prison term in the Colorado Department of Corrections, measured not in headlines, but in calendars that will outlast youth, parties, and first days of school. On sentencing day, the courtroom felt smaller than the stake. The defendant stood in jail, khakis at the rail, hands shackled at the waist, a court interpreter murmuring when needed, his eyes mostly down. His case number had become his name. He had already said the two words that collapse a trial: "Guilty, Your Honor." Before the number came, the voices did. Victim impact statements are not evidence. They are the truth, unbraided from rules. Ariana's friends and family stepped into that space and painted her back into the room. They talked about her art and her laughter, about the ordinary gravity of her kindness, about a son who would now measure summers without her. One friend described the way Ariana's smile made strangers feel like old friends. Another described the phone call where the world went sideways. They said she was found in her bed. I thought she was sleeping. Then the rest of the sentence came. They did not mention famous names from 1969. This wasn't about a footnote in American crime. It was about a woman who should have watched fireworks on July 4th and instead became a headline on July 3rd. Still, the unspeakable symmetry hovered in the room for anyone who knew. A granddaughter taken by blades, half a century after a grandmother was taken by blades. Violence is indifferent like that. It doesn't respect history, it repeats it. When it was the defendant's turn, he didn't say much. There is not a lot to say when the record shows prints, video, admission, and flight. Counsel asked the court to recognize youth and intoxication, to draw a breath between decision and act. The judge listened, the way judges do, pen quiet over a legal pad already full of notes. Then, the court spoke. The judge recounted what the plea recognized. This was not an accident or a scuffle. It was a fatal, close-range attack in a private space where Ariana should have been safest. The court acknowledged the strength of the evidence, the defendant's admission, and the devastation to a family and city. And then the court did the one thing only a court can do. It converted grief into math. A term of years measured in decades. Prison, not county. Credit for time served. Because the law counts days precisely even when memory cannot. Mandatory parole to follow, because violent felonies carry tails in Colorado. A protective order made permanent as to Ariana's family. The clang of the deputy's keys was louder than the paper sounded. In the hallway, the DA's team said what prosecutors say on days like this: that no sentence returns a life, that this result was grounded in evidence and accountability, and that they were grateful to the witnesses who came forward, especially the neighbor who opened the door on a frantic knock and started a chain that ended in a courtroom, and the detectives who followed a plastic cup from Colfax to a name. Inside, a clerk stamped the mittimus, a document with one job: to move a human being from a county jail to the state prison system. It is a thin piece of paper that carries a very heavy door. If you zoom out from the docket lines and the legal Latin, the arc of Ariana's case reads as stark as any we've covered. A summer Friday in Denver, a quiet second-floor unit, a woman found in her bed, gone. A camera's eye on East Colfax, a clear cup, a fingerprint ridge pattern that refused to be argued away. An interview where a young man decided that saying the worst part out loud might soften the weight of his future. A prosecutor who chose certainty over spectacle, and a judge who turned that certainty into years the way the law requires. What remains belongs to the people who loved Ariana, a son who will carry both her name and the absence of her voice into adulthood, friends who will tell her stories to keep them from fading, a family that knows too well how headlines can flatten a person and that will push back the only way that works, by refusing to let Ariana be reduced to a last sentence in an affidavit. For the rest of us, the lesson sits in smaller places: in a cup left in a yard, in a camera lens over a busy street, in the choice by a neighbor to open the door, in the difference between a fight and a murder that the law draws with careful words, because those words become years. There's a last line we always reach for here on the witness record, because the work of paying attention doesn't stop when a gavel drops. If Ariana's story moved you, don't let it end at sadness. Check in on the people who say yes too easily, who trust too quickly, who make a city gentler just by being in it. Teach them to keep their doorframes strong and their circles stronger. And when you hear a knock that sounds wrong, open it. But bring help with you. This is how we honor the victim without giving the killer the last word. We learn. We watch out for one another, and we say their names. Ariana Jean Wolk. We remember.